teachers of young ex-offenders see and the behaviour that teachers of professional adults see might be more similar than you think. My name is Sarah and I'm your tutor at the Education Management Group. When I was studying for my level 5 in education and training, as you're doing now, I was teaching literacy to young ex-offenders for 2 days a week, and the other 2 days a week I was teaching a group of professional adults the knowledge units of an MVQ level 3 in advice and guidance. On the 5th day, I had college. As a new and qualified teacher, I was experiencing lots of things in both sets of lessons that I didn't yet have the pedagogical knowledge to make sense of. But what I did know was that behaviour was a problem in almost all of the sessions that I ran for both groups. As part of my level 5, we were tasked with carrying out a research project on a pedagogical issue of our choice. I chose behaviour because it was a really good opportunity to explore some of these issues that I've been experiencing. I'm going to tell you about some of these things now. If you find them useful and want to read more about them, I've put the references at the end of this video, or you could actually reference this video if you wanted to. The guide for referencing is in the start of your book. So I'll tell you about my young offender students first of all. So they were a group of 3 young men who had been referred to the Youth Offending Service, and I was a literacy tutor at the time. Those students had literacy skills that range between pre-entry level, so that means that they could not read or write at all, up to entry level 3. Now that is actually quite a big range because at pre-entry level, often you don't know the alphabet and you're unable to spell your own name. Whereas at entry level 3, you can actually be quite an experienced writer, but you might have forgotten some of those rules of English as you've gone through your life. Clearly there were some differentiation issues there, but we're not talking about differentiation today. I knew that these 3 young men had had very poor experiences of learning in the past. They'd had poor experiences of learning at school, they'd had poor experiences at learning when they were in prison, and now they were coming into another education environment and they were expecting to have yet another poor experience. Good attendance wasn't something that they were used to. This meant that sometimes they would arrive and sometimes they wouldn't. I was working at the YMCA at the time. I'd been there for a while. I'd been working with our residents who were all classed as homeless, and I'd been running a job club, doing lots of teaching in between. So I was aware of some of the issues that can cause people to have poor experiences of learning and how that can pan out as a result. So the main behaviour issues that I experienced from the young ex-offenders were things like talking to each other while they were supposed to be listening, playing on their mobiles, not completing tasks that I'd asked them to do, walking out of a session, cockiness and insolence, extreme views that they had no problem in expressing, and things like burping and other bodily functions. I'll spare you the details. So now let's talk about my group of professional adults who I was also teaching. Now at the time I had very little experience of working with professional adults because all I'd done up until that point was work with long-term unemployed people, helping them back into work and teaching employability skills, basic literacy tutoring for people who perhaps hadn't been to school or in the same position as their young offenders. And I was young, I was a very young teacher. I was in my early 20s, and when I was asked to deliver the MVQ level 3 in advice and guidance to a group of essentially my colleagues, I was nervous. There was a huge element of imposter syndrome. It's different if you're teaching a group of people who perhaps don't know as much as you. I didn't know that with my colleagues. I knew that they all needed the qualification, and I knew that I already had the qualification that's higher than the one that they were going to get with me, but most of them were experienced practitioners. They were working directly with our residents. So the kind of learners that I had in that group were people like support workers, people who worked one-to-one with people with lots of additional needs, smoking cessation workers, people who worked with young parents, and drugs counsellors. The project came about because my organisation received some funding to deliver this qualification. There was a strict time limit on it, and my manager was very, very keen that we were going to get this funding. So everybody needed to complete. It was a group of around 10 people, which I know doesn't seem huge. It was bigger than the groups that I had been used to working with. And much like the people from the Youth Offending Service, these people had been told that they had to attend, whether they wanted to or not. However, even now when I'm talking about it, it seems obvious where this story is going. But at the time, perhaps I didn't have the insight to be able to predict this. And I hadn't thought about the similarities between these 2 types of groups. Sadly, none of my group of professional adults actually wanted to get this qualification. It was relevant to their work, but it meant studying, and they didn't want to study, they wanted to work. If they didn't attend, my manager was very strict, not with them, but with me. So I would do one-to-ones with those people to catch them up with what they'd missed. As a result of that, it didn't matter whether they attended or not. There would be many excuses as to why people couldn't attend, but the person that inconvenienced wasn't, as it would be in real life, the learner who would then need to catch up on what they'd missed. It inconvenienced me, the teacher, because I then needed to run multiple sessions of the same content to people on a one-to-one basis. So I'll tell you some of the behaviour issues that I experienced with that group. Things like talking to each other while I was talking, using their mobiles, not completing tasks that I asked them to do, walking out of sessions, cockiness and insolence, extreme views that they had no problem at all in expressing, and burping and bodily issues. That should sound quite familiar because it's exactly the same list of behavioural issues that I had with the group of ex-offenders. Okay, so we already know that whatever group we're teaching, we should have some kind of behaviour contract or rules in place. And we also know that one of the best ways to do this is to negotiate and agree ground rules. Really, an excellent way to sort your ground rules out at the start of a session is to ask your students what they think is acceptable or not acceptable. You then do the same, and then you put everything together, and then you come up with a nice contract to say what kind of behaviour is okay in the session and what kind of behaviour isn't. Then throughout the sessions, if you start to see that behaviour happening, you can return to the contract, you can return to the list of rules that you've all made together, and hopefully that should bring things back. There are, of course, lots of other ways to manage behaviour in the session, but that one's a classic. For the young offenders group, that was what I had done. The issue was that there was no behaviour that they found unacceptable. Swearing's good, swearing at each other's good, walking out when they want to have a cigarette is good, telling you straight up when they're bored is good, burping and farting in sessions is good. Kind of made it a little bit difficult to make that contract at the start. Rather than making a load of rules at the start, if there's nothing that they think is unacceptable, we'll just see how it goes. It's a good opportunity for me to talk to them about behaviour as we go along. But as I say, those sorts of behaviours were expected. I dealt with them lots of times before. I knew I would be dealing with them again in the future, and I understood the reasons why. However, despite knowing about the contract and knowing how to set rules at the start of a session, I didn't do that with my group of professional learners. Why? Why did I not? Well, the two main reasons were that they were a group of professional learners. They're managing behaviour all the time in their roles that they do every day. Surely they wouldn't be that bad in a session. But also, the fact that I was also their colleague, a lot younger than some of them, not as experienced as some of them, really put me in a position where I felt like I couldn't set the rules. Roles felt blurred, and I really didn't want to patronise them. However, all groups need some sort of formality, whether they are our colleagues, our managers, groups of people off the street who we don't know. Everyone needs to know what to expect. It may have even made my group of professionals feel insecure that there were no rules in place. One of the things I had noticed was that our teacher at the time for level 5 was absolutely incredible at dealing with behavioural issues within our group. And there were lots of behavioural issues within our group, even though we were a group of adults who were learning to be teachers. So I think you'd kind of expect behaviour to be pretty much perfect, but it wasn't. And the way that she dealt with it amazed me every week. I don't know whether it was because she was able to do it with a bit of a smile, plus she had loads of experience, so I couldn't really question that, or whether it was just that she'd seen it a million times before and it didn't affect her anymore. I decided to speak to her about it on a one-to-one basis because I could see some of those similarities there and find out how she did it. For her, it was about compartmentalising the behaviour, understanding why people were behaving a certain way, how they were feeling, and how that then translates to their behaviour, and picking your battles. Most poor behaviour in sessions isn't personal anyway, even though it can really feel it. But my teacher would start every day afresh, but with the knowledge of what had happened before. Now, I found at the time, and I've found since, that looking for behaviour management strategies when you're teaching your peers is quite difficult. There's not that much theory around it. It just comes under general behaviour management. And then I started to think, is it actually more about us as teachers and how we feel about ourselves? You look at those individual groups, they're different people, they're different backgrounds and things like that, but actually their issues are very much the same. So now I know that poor behaviour can happen. I know how I feel about those individual aspects of poor behaviour, and I know how I can then manage them. Now, you might not get your group of professional adults throwing chairs across the room, as we can get with our younger learners with additional needs, but some behaviours that we can see from groups of professional adults can be just as disruptive in a different way and cause long-term damage, not necessarily to other learners, but to us as teachers and our esteem as teachers and our confidence as teachers. When we're looking at behaviour, make sure you are comfortable with what is on that contract, because if you're not, it's going to distract you for every session that you have with those students. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.